sector, wind sector, lot to do with the electric vehicle ecosystem, there is a lot more maturity. So it's all about deploying capital at a very fast pace. There, the business case for deployment of capital is already very strong. The only thing that needs to be solved for now is policy related action in terms of how fast do we deploy it. So to give you an example, if I take the India context, we are deploying about 20-30 gigawatts of renewable energy every year, but there are almost 3 times as many projects or as much capacity that's still stuck in process related approvals. And this is not the story just for India, but it's a story that's common around the world. So how do we solve these bottlenecks to fast pace the deployment? So that's for the third side. When it comes to the equity side of the capital, the way we have been able to dramatically cut cost for, let's say, renewable energy, and I was in a panel with the IPCC chair yesterday, and he was showing some really very interesting data over a 20-year period on how the cost of renewable energy has come down. Now, why can't we replicate that for some of the new technologies, especially for, let's say, material circularity? So that's the other big area of action, that how do we deploy capital, equity capital in these specific areas with the primary aim of making it commercially viable at scale around the ecosystem. This becomes especially important because the cost of capital in different parts of the world is very similar, but the cost of climate action, the carbon in the air, is common. So how do we ensure that the areas where the cost of equity capital is very low, those areas can really help accelerate some of the cost deployment? And the last bit is the early stage technology. So early stage technology is definitely about taking a bet, bold bet. This is where I would say the role of blended finance comes in, and especially climate philanthropy is a lot of the work that other organizations are doing. That's the area that really needs to be catalyzed. So we really have to now take a more segmented approach to getting each of these specific subsectors within climate to be actioned.
Thank you. And we'll come back to you about the subsectors, especially because Mahindra has, many different. But let's hone in. You mentioned, of course, about mobility. And then Kathy would love to hear from the General Motors perspective. What are you seeing in the market?
Yeah, so GM has been engaged. Can you hear me okay, for one? Okay, good. GM has been engaged with climate financing through several initiatives, one being our investment in sustainability technology. And our biggest investment in technology is in our EVs and our EV future. Another one is within our manufacturing facilities, because we've been around for a long time. We have an aging infrastructure. And when we make the decisions about replacing our HVAC systems or heating and ventilation systems or our paint ovens, we're not just looking at the cost of how much things are. A lot of times the more efficient equipment costs more. But if you're looking at long-term solutions and meeting our carbon neutral or net zero goals, sometimes you have to spend a little bit more money up front because you don't want to replace something before the end of its useful life, which ends up being more expensive. And then also just partnerships, just collaborations like CGI here. We've been part of CGI for several years, and then we have First Movers Coalition and a lot of different collaborations that we've been involved in, because we know we can't do it alone, and you have to work together to make progress. And far as scaling and accelerating climate financing, the biggest ones are transparent reporting, just being open and honest about our reporting and gaining the trust of our stakeholders and our investors. And then what's really important to me is the employee engagement. And that's not just like on the surface of just understanding sustainability. It's like I want everyone to feel in our corporation that it's just like safety and quality. And they feel like they have to, or they want to, make sustainability innovation ideas across the company. You mentioned circularity. That's very important. It comes from the very beginning of our products to the very end, thinking about the end in mind.
Thank you, Kathy. Pretty much the same question to you, Louis, representing the apparel and the fashion industry, which is, obviously one of the biggest sectors. But if you can give a broader overview before we get to you specifically on EII.
Sure.
Might have to raise.
It's not.
It's working.
Okay.
Yes.
Now, that we play is apparel.
Is he holding it at the bottom? He's holding it at the bottom.
We were founded by a group of large mass retailers in the U.S., then complemented by European mass retailers, H&M Group, Target, Gap, PVH, Lululemon. The list goes on. We work with about 50 plus brand retailers, and for them to decarbonize their production, which is 97% of their carbon is Scope 3 emissions, they would have to collaborate because it is not a vertically integrated supply chain. They don't own it. And half of the carbon is coming from thermal heat generated by on-site coal boilers. So that would mean over the next 5 years to 2030, if their goal under UNFCCC is to cut their carbon in half in Scope 3 emissions, they would have to work together to finance and support the rapid implementation of new equipment or new technology. So to some of the previous points that were being made, we do know there are new technologies coming that can support electrification, battery storage, dry processing. This is all happening in the dyeing and finishing of fabrics. But there were existing technologies that just weren't getting to scale because there's not an incentive for a supplier to take on this work unless they have a promise of future business. So one of the roles that we play in addition to working with banks and development banks, brand retailers, and suppliers is to try to create volume agreements based on reaching low carbon thresh points. So as I talk a little bit more about the finance, that's initially our role is to try to come in and pull corporate philanthropy and corporate treasury dollars around what becomes kind of a blended capital approach. Then you unlock debt financing from banks and development banks to be able to do that. So that's what we've been really working on. And this next year then has to be deployment around that, because we've found that yes, it can be challenging sometimes to fundraise, but not as challenging as actually putting that dollar or euro in a good project. And so our role now around deploying that capital and demonstrating that blended capital finance projects can work and are successful is kind of the next phase of that work for us.
Thank you, Louis. We'll come back to you to go a little deeper on the how, so if you want to think about that. But coming back, I think you all mentioned partnerships, and we want to go a little deeper on that topic. So, Ankit, from a Mahindra standpoint, again, it's a conglomerate. It's operating in India, but you do have global presence. There's different sectors from mobility to, real estate and so on, technology. What are some of the big partnerships which you think are helpful, and whether it's private or along with government, because you'd also mentioned the bottleneck of the policy, but would be good to understand like what's working, how Mahindra is taking it forward.
Oh, definitely. I think the role of partnerships is extremely important, and we categorize that into two parts. So the first part are very tangible, action-oriented partnerships, which are often financial in nature. So over the last 18 odd months, we have had 5 impact investors come into different parts of the business, bringing in about $500 million. So we have the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, the British institutional investors, Japan Sovereign Fund, Singapore Sovereign Fund. So different people coming in, all bringing their expertise, very much intent on financial performance, but at the same time making sure that we are progressing on sustainability targets as well. And that has made a big difference in each of the businesses that they have come in. All of them green businesses, so 3-wheeler electric manufacturing, 4-wheeler electric manufacturing, and the entire renewable energy sector. So that's one. The second kind of partnerships is what we definitely emphasize a lot more on is advocacy related partnerships. So there are these sectors which are well established and it's all about execution at pace. But there are many more new sectors which need to be established. And I'll specifically pick the example of, let's say, green steel. Now, we don't, as Mahindra, don't manufacture green steel, but we are a very large consumer of green steel. So the work that we have done with, by getting involved with the World Economic Forum's First Movers Coalition, but not just them, but also with the Sweden and India collaboration called Lead IT, which is also focused on green steel, but also with Climate Group's Steel Zero program. So across these 3 or 4 different platforms, each of them bringing different kind of stakeholders and different kind of expertise on the table, we have been advocating on this work. And that has made a very tangible difference in spite of having no financial outcomes directly linked in moving the entire steel sector forward in terms of the government releasing a specific policy paper around this, not just policy paper, but policy objective, incentives, etc. in terms of many of the large steel companies, which is a large part of the global steel manufacturing capacity, putting down very clear roadmaps, and not just putting the roadmaps, but also working with them to improve that and scrutinize that. So this is the kind of other partnership where we have been able to, without really being just a buyer in a way, but have been very tangibly been able to move the needle. And this is not just one area. We are trying to do that, not just Mahindra, but again with the entire variety of corporate sector coming together to solve these policy issues, which is not something that can be solved by one. So renewable energy is another area where this is being done. We were just speaking about circularity. So in India, there's a lot of regulation around EPR, extended producers responsibility, for new sectors, for waste oil, for end-of-life vehicles. So in each of these areas, the role of advocacy in partnership with different organizations is becoming increasingly important.
Thank you. I mean, a lot of good inputs here. I'll take the same question to Kathy, General Motors side. I mean, of course, I've worked with good partnerships on the private, broader mobility. And there's also the question around financing for infrastructure, and how do you really incentivize consumers to transition and buy, EVs, but then also more of the electrification of transport. So would love to understand the strategy, partnerships, and if there's anything which is of note from a General Motors perspective.
Yeah, so GM has had the vision of zero crashes, zero emissions, zero congestion since 2017. So our end goal is an all-electric future. It's not going to be a straight path. We have to be flexible. We never know where it's going to go. We have customer adoption that's there. We have infrastructure that we need to build up. There's things like elections where we don't know if our tax incentives for customers are going to still be there. So we're trying to work through that and, like I said, be flexible and also work with partners. We're working with partners to build up the charging infrastructure. And we're also working with our partners, which is our suppliers, in bringing them along along our journey, having them sign a supplier pledge, having the same commitments as us, and also helping them. We're not just saying we want you to have these commitments, but we're working together to help them, solve the scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions levels.
Anything, useful nuggets in terms of perhaps any state level work or which you would like to mention, or it's something more broad?
It's the advocating. It's advocating for those incentives. It's advocating for the greening of the grid, because even if we were 100% EVs, our carbon footprint is still not going to be zero because we have the upstream emissions. So trying to go through and work on those types of incentives and policies.
Yes, I mean, one of the things we heard yesterday in one of the sessions around scaling of EVs was around the grid decarbonization, which I know GM and quite a few other companies have been focusing on, because, of course, mobility being a big emissions, you won't really have, drop in emissions without cleaning the grid as well. So I know, kudos for at least trying that. I know we're all trying. Yes. Moving to you, Louis, from the Apparel Impact Institutes and the coalition. So there are lots of private sector. There is financing from, I know, a major multilateral. If you want to share something on those, and again, what do you see is working, but also what do you see some of the biggest challenges you've had to overcome, because it's pretty new in terms of what you're trying to do on financing and deployment?
Yeah, for the work of decarbonizing in this sector, a lot of it's been around target setting and efficiency programs, which are a great start because they'll put money back into the supplier's pocket. But even that's been kind of a challenging sell when Nike's coming in on a Thursday and saying do the Nike energy efficiency program, and then Adidas is coming in on the next Wednesday saying no, do the Adidas version, and we work with a different technical assistance group and we have a different partner. So we were founded, we recognized that if we could actually defragment all the multitude of initiatives happening by bringing it under one umbrella and saying, well, it's great if you're working with this group or this group, it all can fit, and so that it would be one industry directive. That's been a big part of just getting them started. And now the issue around partnership is so much of the coalition has been happening in the North and in the West, and where the big money is coming from and commitments. But on the ground, there are manufacturing associations, trade associations that are coming up with their own regional strategies around decarb. There's country strategies. And if we're not listening to the on-the-ground suppliers to tell us, what does decarbonization look like for you? You already have new boilers. You don't want to replace them. What's going to be the solution that's going to make sense for you to actually take this work on? And so a big part of it is just getting in the room together and letting the users of this finance actually tell us, who say, we don't want debt. We already have enough debt. We're having to fund the production goods and services until we can invoice for the goods, and so we're constantly sitting on these debt cycles for production. We don't want to take on more debt for decarbonization, and so then it's listening and saying, what if we looked at operating expenses and we create a leasing program for those same equipment? And so this is where I find the most exciting stuff happens, is just like bringing different people into the room around this partnership. So deployment is it. I mean, right now is the time to say, if we're raising all this capital, but we can't actually get it into good projects because there's no incentive for a supplier to take on the work, then we're going to fail. And so to us, the biggest challenge is being able to actually create that type of incentive. And I'll just kind of end on one of the ways that we're doing it is looking at volume. And if we can create a pool of low carbon facilities in Bangladesh, for example, where 40% of the GDP is textile apparel, and you look at the largest brand retailers that are producing in Bangladesh, and one of them might be 5% of that GDP, then all of a sudden you get 2 or 3 of them together in a room and you sit down with the suppliers that are making up the most of this production, and you start to design, what does that look like from a policy perspective? What does that look like from an actual financing perspective? And this is what's happening that's new. And at the end of the day, then the suppliers can say, if you'll make an agreement to source X% of your volume for the next 12 to 18 months from those of us who reach this verified carbon threshold that you're putting in front of us, year over year milestones towards decarbonization, then we would be able to take on, then we would be willing to take on some of the. So it's sometimes what we think they're asking for in terms of following purchasing with the term of a loan may actually not be what they're looking for. They're looking for something sometimes a lot shorter term or some time of movement towards that agreement. And so I think that's the most exciting work that we're doing. And ask me again in 12 months at the next COP, if I have the privilege to speak again, how successful we are. We're going to be in Bangalore in a couple of months, sitting down, actually striking these deals and sort of activation and 100-day sprint to get these deals off the ground. And I think the proof is, obviously, and will we be able to pull it off by getting these parties who oftentimes, while they're business partners, there's also a lot of tension around where the power is and who gets to make the decisions around these investments.
Thank you. I'm sure we'll see you at COP next year, and we'll take on like the progress reporting. So as a Clinton Global Initiative commitment maker, you have the accountability part. We have pretty much, I'd say, 2, 3, 5 minutes max for this panel to wrap before we move to the next segment. I wanted to ask each of you, what's one big positive thing you want to either share or one big ask? I honestly don't know who is in our audience today, but I know we're having a live streaming and also a subsequent recording. So if you want to leave one key message, again, we would really like to end it on a positive note. I know it's more doom and gloom, but CGI is about what's working and showcasing that. Or if you have any ask, because we all are in this together. So maybe, Louis, I'll start with you.
Sure. Well, I always appreciate that. So as someone who's raising capital, and when I say that, what I raise is the catalytic capital. So I'm looking at concessionary first loss, loan guarantee money that I pool, and then I put that back into partnerships with ADB, with IFC, with HSBC, Standard Chartered. These are all our partners around us. So our commitment at CGI during Climate Week was that we would pool an additional $250 million toward that work, and that we would be able to activate it with the partners that we just said. So they're all, the banks and the development banks are anxious to have me raise that kind of concessionary. And a lot of the brands are just learning. And so we launched a playbook for sustainable finance at Climate Week. And I'll end, I know, just to get the CFOs and the brands to understand it's not just grant making, it's not just project funding. To get out of pilot phase, you're going to have to participate in other asset classes. So start looking at your treasury dollars. Let's get creative. So that's my call, is to join us in this fun work that we're doing, because it is exciting.
Great, thank you. Ankit, maybe I'll move to you. What's your big message or big ask?
Sure. So representing the private sector, I can say that the one good thing that all companies around the world know is how to set very clear financial annual metrics into performance reviews. So how can we make sure that we have the right sustainability KPIs, financial KPIs, for not just the sustainability teams, but for all stakeholders of an organization. It could be about funding, it could be about renewable energy targets, it could be about granting loans depending on the context of the industry, but having very clear, measurable annual targets across the entire organization and integrating sustainability in the core strategy of the business. That is what will really move the needle. So that's the one message.
Great. We'll hold you accountable on those metrics. And I know it's the boon, but it's also the bane. But we'll look at that positively. And then finally, Kathy, you have the last word.
So my advice is that sustainability doesn't have to be a choice or be seen as a risk. It's not only good for the environment, but it's also good from a business perspective. And it's really important to show the value of sustainability. And when I say value, it's not always financial. There's a lot of other options and opinions on sustainability, and it's important to drive that across your whole organization.
Great. Thank you so much. And if we can have a round of applause for our panelists. So look forward to hearing from our next one. So thank you. And I will use this. And I'd now like to introduce and welcome Jesper Brodin, the CEO of Inca Group and IKEA, for your keynote remarks. Thank you for joining us. And I know everyone... You don't... If you hear...
Hey, good morning, everybody. So, how many has a jet lag in the room? All right, it feels good to be in good company. So, thank you. I have a few minutes to share a couple of important topics for us in relation to climate change. Needless to say, we're all here agree on that combating climate change must be the most important priority for humanity in this decade, in this time. At IKEA, reflecting on the last year, coming here, climate change, like in so many places on the planet, is no longer a distant threat, but it's upon us. We recognize that in at least 6 of the communities where we operate, we have seen massive human tragedy and loss the last year only, with weather events that have been extreme, from floodings in Dubai, China, Central Europe. We have seen 2 monster storms in Florida. We have seen recent enormous impact in parts of Spain. Except for the human tragedy, obviously the impact on a company like IKEA from both a top line and a cost bottom line perspective is upon us. And it's going to be one of the things that we will make reporting on in this year's P&L, basically. This is no myth, this is no decimal commas, this is massive impact on our business already. Listen, we have, as a company, IKEA has been committed to Paris Agreement since the start. That means, obviously, that we take upon ourselves to be responsible for the reduction of carbon until 2050 by 90%, but already by 2030 by 50%. When we set out a few years ago, we didn't come from a point of empty promises or ambitions or visions only. We had some evidence and some ideas on how we would make it happen. What I can share with you today is, I think, an injection of hope, because a company like IKEA's, with a turnover of 45 billion euro, operating end-to-end from raw material, production, transport, retailing, life at home, the products that are used by our customers, which is obviously downstream part of our Scope 3, the afterlife of our products. All of that carbon, as we look at today, since the Paris Agreement, have been reduced, not relative, but absolute, by 24%, which is part of our reporting. That's good news, but here comes even better news. We have grown our business by 31%. So, here we have an example of one big company, or big, if you like, ecosystem, that is doing fantastic from a business perspective and reducing carbon. Now, before I speak more about the business aspect, let me also share with you that we believe there are 3 reasons why this is important for us. And to start with, the ethical perspective is important enough for us. We need to take the responsibility with the knowledge we have today on the impact we have on the world. We simply can't allow ourselves to pass on to the next generation to address the issues. Secondly, very important, from a brand perspective, if you want to be relevant, not only tomorrow, but already today, if you want to attract the best co-workers, and if you want to grow your customer base, you need to be good at this. People don't ask for perfection, but they ask for your leadership. We do surveys with about 30,000 plus people in 34 markets in IKEA. Today, the biggest challenge that people express to us is climate change. 68% of all IKEA customers, ordinary people out there, call out climate change as their biggest fear. That comes paired with a very interesting and important fact for all of us. When we ask the same group of people, and by the way, it's very stable from China to US to Sweden and so forth. When we ask the same group of people, are you prepared to pay extra for climate smart? The answer is clearly no. 6% can afford a higher price. It leads you to think maybe from a distance that people would not care after all, but it's the wrong conclusion. People simply don't have the money. So here we are. We stand before one of the biggest economic transformations, an existentialistic topic. For us, this is not a party political topic at all. It's about existentialism and it's about business. The good news is, every time so far that we have been able to touch carbon in IKEA, we touch cost. Every time we have implemented renewable energy, when we scale up our electric vehicles, every time we take steps towards circularity, every time we prolong life, every time we propose new solutions to our customers for sustainable living, we're actually doing great business. We need together to make sure that we change the narrative, because still the majority of people out there believe that adapting to or transforming to climate smart comes at an additional cost, when it's actually the opposite. I'm right in this, and if I'm not, I will be. All right? And in order to be right faster, we are here in this COP to reach out, representing of course the IKEA network, but also lots of corporations out there, to say one of the most important things for us is now to intensify the collaboration between policymakers and private sector. Leaders, CEO of private sector, are today not abstract, not confused. They are very concrete. We're asking for policies to speed up the improvement of grids. We're asking for policies to help us speed up the infrastructure of electric vehicles. We're asking for bans of incineration of the raw materials that we need in order to build a circular economy. We're asking for shortening the permitting process of renewable energy. And we're asking for help to simplify and align reporting and a couple of other things that are important for us to reach this objective. So we hope that we will continue this dialogue and together make sure that we take the actions that are needed, we do them with impact, and we do them with a higher speed than we've done so far. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Jesper. I'm sure you are right and will be as well, like very soon. With that, I would like to kick it over to our second panel. So I'll invite Sarah to start and then invite the panelists.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Excellent. This is very strange. I'm Sarah Barton. I'm the Director of Women and Girls Equality for the Clinton Global Initiative, and I'm lucky to work alongside my colleague Mayuri and all of our other teams to mainstream and prioritize gender across all of our work. I'm very excited to pick up on some of the themes we've already heard about today, and I think one of the things we'll really want to focus on is how often gender is sort of segregated and seen as philanthropy or charity rather than as a central core business and investment objective and opportunity. So we want to really dive in further into how some of the financing pieces that are accelerating inclusion of gender in the climate and sustainability context are working. So with that, I will ask our panelists to join us, starting with Gabriel Azevedo, Chief Strategy Officer for the Inter-American Development Bank's IDB Invest Initiative. Second, I will ask Mansi Shah, Senior Coordinator for the Self-Employed Women's Association, SEWA, to join us. And third, but not least, I will ask Jim Andrew, Executive Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer of PepsiCo. Thank you. I have an abundance of headsets around me. So, you know, we've seen in the context of gender and climate financing, the reality that we know women are on the front lines of the climate crisis in terms of health impacts due to extreme heat and other major catastrophic events as it affects their health and their families, as well as their economic participation. We also know that women are not being prioritized and funded as frontline solution drivers in the climate crisis. So women attract less than 3% of climate financing. We see that also reflected in other areas of gender investing, I'll just say. But that if we're not harnessing that opportunity, we're really missing both a market opportunity as well as a broader economic opportunity. So picking up a little bit on what Mayuri mentioned at the beginning, CGI focuses on what's working. I'd like to start by asking everyone to share, from your perspective, what is working, what are you seeing in the field, where are you seeing sort of gender and climate or sustainability financing align in positive ways? Jim, I'll start with you.
Great, thanks, Sarah. Everybody hear me okay? Again, this is very weird. Great, thank you. I'm at PepsiCo, which many of you will know for our beverages, but we're actually a far larger food company. And we're deeply rooted in agriculture, and as a part of that, the female farmer is a critical part of our business and our business ecosystem. And what's working is really, we know when we put together a couple of things and translate it into a program, it works. And in the case of agriculture, in the case of our supply chain, it's really around financial, technical, and cultural support. And let me just briefly touch each. Financial is, if we're talking about farmers, any farmers, and we're talking about climate smart agriculture, we're talking about changes. And that could be everything from land tenure to practice changes to new female founder startup innovators. But there's a money piece to it. There's also a technical advice piece. If you're a farmer in rural India growing a few potatoes behind your house, and somebody comes to you and says, hey, I want you to make a change, it's better for the planet, let's assume you want to, the first question is going to be, but I don't actually even know what that means. I don't know how to do that. And so providing the technical advice. Now, that's just as true for a 10,000 acre farmer, highly sophisticated in Wisconsin. So technical advice. And the third is cultural. Nobody likes to be alone. Nobody likes to stand out, to look different. And I spent a lot of time with farmers around the world, and male, female, big, small, they always say the same, which is, as I make a change, I all of a sudden am different than the community I'm in. And so we support that in a number of ways, not the least of which is we have a number of demo farms. And the farmers learn from other farmers, and they take support from seeing what works at somebody down the road, not on the other side of the world. So how does that translate into real life? We have a program in rural southwest Mexico called AgroVida. It's a combination of PepsiCo business investing, as well as the PepsiCo Foundation, as well as a number of NGOs, in particular ProForest, where we work with female farmers to grow sustainably palm oil, cocoa, and increasingly plantains, which we now are buying into our business as a cooperative, buying in for our plantain snacks. And it's everything from technical advice to social to that support, but it's very much focused on female farmers sustainably growing in a place where they haven't before. And when you put those things together, that's what works. And that's what we've seen, and that works everywhere in the world.
Thank you. Picking up on that, Monty, what are you seeing in the women that you work with in India?
Am I audible? Yeah. Thank you very much, Sarah. And the women whom I represent here are the poorest of the poor. Most often these women are at the bottom of the value chain, where most of the risks are always concentrated. The women I'm talking about are the street vendors, the construction workers, the agricultural workers, the home-based workers, and so on. These are the members of SIPA.
No, I'm still not hearing you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Now,
yes.
thank Thank you so much. So organizing these women for over 5 decades now, what we have seen is that these women, they bear unequal responsibilities, along with sharing the responsibility of procuring food, water, energy, and other vital resources for the family. They also shoulder the responsibility of the care. And these kind of unequal responsibilities make these women much more vulnerable to climate shocks than the men and the other community members. For example, whenever there is a heat wave or there is a drought or excess rains or any kind of climate shocks, these women have to travel much more farther to collect water, to collect food. They have to stay in disaster-prone areas because the family members for whom they are caring for, they cannot be relocated. And also during the disaster, whenever there is disasters, the women, over 60% of the members with whom we work with are rural, and there is a dearth of quality access to quality healthcare services during a disaster. And so these are the kind of challenges that these women are facing. And this disproportionate impact of climate change on the poor is what calls for urgent and immediate action. Our experience working with the women has also shown us that while world over, globally, people think that women are not bankable and that women and gender and finance does not go. As you just said, when it comes to gender and finance, it's all about charity. But what we have seen is women and poor do not need charity. What they need is innovative financing solutions that can help build their resilience, that can help them get back on their feet, rebuild their livelihoods in face of climate shocks. And therefore, to address these challenges, SEVA piloted the Livelihood Recovery and Resilience Fund. It's a pool of blended finance. That has dual objectives. One is the first objective is climate action, of course, and the second is to enable financial inclusion with former financial systems for the women, so that women are able to access credit in face of climate shocks, rebuild their lives and livelihoods, and stand back up on their feet. And further, the Livelihood Recovery and Resilience Fund also enables immediate access to credit. Interest-free loans in face of climate shocks. Generally, the government's relief mechanisms take about 4 to 6 months to get the relief funds reach women. And poor women cannot wait for 6 months to restart their livelihood. So the Livelihood Recovery and Resilience Fund, it provides them immediate returnable grant, which they can return when the government relief is disbursed. And the success of this pilot has shown that access to innovative finance helps in building the resilience of the poor, and it helps in strengthening the locally led adaptation and mitigation measures that are adapted, and it helps in driving climate action much more effectively and efficiently.
Thank you. Gabrielle, tell us about IDB Invest.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, thanks, Sarah. First, I want to congratulate CGI because we hear a lot about just transition. And many of us don't know what it really means. It becomes very fuzzy, and narrowing down to what exactly it could mean or it should mean is really important. And I think the agenda that you bring to this panel is one of the very critical aspects of just transition.
Thank you.
Now, I'm not going to talk a lot about ourselves. I think I want to use the time to answer your question about what's working and what's not working, right? What's working? Every time that we include women, every time that we provide access to economic opportunities and finance to women, things usually work. So, and when I hear the CEO of IKEA say every time he touches carbon, he touches cost, I'm going to paraphrase him and say every time we touch women, we touch health, we touch productivity, we touch education, because their first investment is on their future, or the future of their children, their family. So this is working. What is not working? We are not working. Financial sector, companies, philanthropies, we are not working hard enough. Because when I hear you say that only 3% of climate finance is going to women, that's a proof that we're not doing enough. And I think we should work a lot harder to scale up that number to much, much higher levels. And I think to do that, what we are trying to do is not only to build partnership, but to be a lot more intentional and a lot more transparent about what we are trying to do, right? We need to raise our level of ambition, and we need to be transparent and accountable to what we're trying to do. For instance, at IDB Invest today, we have a target that 30% of all our financing has a GDI component. Not necessarily gender, it's 80% gender, but also we are touching on other inclusion aspects. We are raising that level of ambition to 6%, 60% by 2028, doubling it. And as of 2025, everything that we'll finance will go to a specific due diligence of gender lenses, trying to pinpoint specific gender-related risks and specific gender-related opportunities. And we are doing this because we want to challenge ourselves and to challenge our partners to come along. So I think it's basically a call for action. And I know that this is something that we're probably going to ask us to do at the end of the panel. I'm going to start my part by making that call of action now. I think we have, as a global community, people and institutions that can be here at COP to challenge ourselves to do a lot more and to raise that 3% to much, much higher numbers.
Thank you. I will say I was very, what Jesper shared about what customers are looking for and what the supply chain is looking for. You can also see the same thing in gender. We see a lot of interest from the workforce in working in places that are gender smart, that are inclusive environments. We see those companies that really embrace those ideals. They perform better. Just from a returns perspective, they perform better. Their workforce, they retain their workforce better. We see that when there is inclusive leadership, but also inclusion throughout the entire sort of lifespan of a company, we know those companies they're not just doing it out of the charity of their own hearts, they're doing it because it's good for business. So I want to ask you, Pepsi is part of a CGI commitment called WISE, Women in the Sustainable Economy. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, among the many partnerships that Pepsi leads and engages with and in, how do you kind of think about what corporates are learning from each other and through sort of participation in these multi-sectoral collaboratives about how to better engage women in your supply chain, and why does it matter to your bottom line? Why is it a business question for you?
Great, thanks. And I say that as someone...
We can't hear you. Hold on. Can you guys hear him? You can?
Okay. Good? Yeah. All right. Okay. And I say that as someone where all of my direct reports, 100% are women, so I totally agree with that. And I want to build off something that Gabrielle said, which is every time that we invest in women in the agricultural supply chain, it yields benefits. It yields business benefits. As I say, we invest philanthropically, but anytime I can tie anything, but in this case we're talking about gender investment in climate smart activities, anytime I can tie anything to the business, it moves over to funding by the business, and there's a lot more zeros on that part of the income statement than there is in the foundation or other philanthropy. So with WISE, what we said was, how do we mobilize as much money as possible in a particular initiative to be able to, in a public-private partnership, take some of these steps and move them forward. And so with a number of companies, and I don't want to miss anybody, Unilever, Danone, McCormick, Nespresso, and USAID, what we said was, let's get together and work towards a common set of objectives that align with the WISE initiative, because we found that to be very powerful. And the reason we're doing this is because it makes good business sense, right? If we invest, and again, we're investing collectively, it's $50 million initial investment, and we're looking to scale that both in terms of number of companies, but also in terms of funding. If we do it, what do we do? If we invest in women, and it's everything from educational advice to agronomic advice to a set of other types of things, what we find is they get higher productivity. Their livelihoods improve. As part of our PepsiCo Positive Transformation, we have agriculture goals, we have livelihood goals that are related to that. So their livelihoods are better. Our supply chain is better. because it's more secure, it's more resilient to the points that were being made earlier. And so that's why we invest. It's the right thing to do, and it helps the business secure crops, because we don't have crops, we don't have a business. And that's really why, females are roughly half of the farm labor, agricultural labor around the world. So therefore, but we know all the issues, you articulate them very well. Therefore, investment disproportionately pays back when we do it. And that's why we stood up this effort. We knew we were going to be stronger collaboratively. These things are all team sports. We knew we can mobilize more money and be able to move more quickly.
Thank you. And we are big fans of WISE, so if anyone in the audience is from a corporate that wants to come and talk to us about it, we're happy to talk. So Monty, you're also part of a CGI commitment that took this pilot concept that you described and scaled it. What can you tell us about how it works and where it's going now?
Thank you. So it was in the July of 2022 at Bellagio at the Women Leaders meeting, where Secretary Clinton and Ambassador Melanie Verveer made an announcement that there is a need for the global communities to come together and take practical steps to address the challenges faced by the poor women due to the climate shocks. It was at this meeting that SEVA shared the success and the learnings from our Livelihood Recovery and Resilience Fund, and the idea emerged to set up the Global Climate Resilience Facility for Women, which has been launched by the CGI under the leadership of Secretary Clinton. This facility will seek to build the climate resilience of the poor women in the global south. It will take the learnings from the Livelihood Recovery and Resilience Fund of SEVA and build upon it globally. SEVA will serve as a technical advisor and founding partner for the facility, and it will share its experience and expertise for the facility and offer its pipeline of initiatives to the facility. I'm very happy to say that the poor women members of SEVA have started saving their 1 day's income every month to contribute to the fund. These are the women who are really poor. These are the women who are not the polluters. They are not the perpetuators. And yet they have decided to take the green path. They have chosen and are marching ahead in thousands. And so today I would like to urge one and all here that it's for us to decide whether we would support these poor women. We would come together and contribute to this facility so that we can strengthen the climate resilience of the poor and who really make change.
Thank you. I'm gonna end with you, and then we'll do one super rapid round. So go for it. Tell us about IDB Invest and what you're doing now.
Okay, I'm going to pick back on what Jim said on mobilization. So what we are doing, we are seeking to be trailblazers on the process of reforming the MDB world. And what we are doing is we just got approval by our shareholders in March for a new business model and a significant increase in capital. And this new business model is moving away from the traditional buy and hold MDB model and lead investor to position ourselves as a catalyst rather than the main investor, and using our additional capital not to do more of the same, but to be different. So we want to use our injection of capital to de-risk, re-risk projects and pave the way so that others can come in and feel comfortable to invest in our region, a region that we know well, where we have presence. So not only we are positioning ourselves as a conduit as opposed to a main investor from now on, but we are also innovating on expanding our pool of financial products so that we can play to the different appetite and to the different interest of multiple investors. And we are also trying to invest part of our own revenues on what we call upstream work so that we can help develop bankable projects for the future, not for this year, but for 4 or 5 years projects that we may finance, but that are open to the market that others can finance. We see this as a major role as a multilateral, especially working in a region like Latin America, where you have one of the highest rates of women entrepreneurs in the world, but one of the largest gaps on financial inclusion between women and men. So I think this is really critical for us. And just a message here for someone in the audience. Louis, you spoke about ADB and IFC. They're great banks, but I hope when you raise that 250 million, you talk to us too. All right? Thank you.
I'm going to ask you to all give me your one sentence call to action to leave the audience with.
Gender smart climate finance is not an asset class. It's an enabler, it's a force multiplier, and it's a de-risker of good, old-fashioned, cold, hard economic returns.
I would like to say that Secretary Clinton told this at the New York CGI meeting, that the discussion we are having today is already too late. We should have been talking about this 10 years ago, about mainstreaming women, gender, and finance. So one thing that I would like to talk here today and ask everyone to do is that whatever we discuss today and at this COP, we must discuss it fully. We must, whatever we decide, whether we decide to invest in gender or not, we must decide. But one thing we should not decide is that there is no more time to deliberate for a couple of more years. There is no more time to invest in small projects, pilots. What we need to look about is long-term sustainable investment in women and in women-led climate action, because mainstreaming women, as we all know here, as we all said here, is the way to build sustainable climate action and to build a resilient future for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Gabriel?
I have two final messages. One, just reinforcing the concept that investing in women is a sound business decision. It makes business sense, number one. And number two, as institutions, we should leave vanity behind. We should be humble, because the challenge is so great that we need to be able to thoroughly work together.
I think I'll leave us with saying, I think what we've really heard across all of our sessions today is that we have these models that work. We have ideas that work. People are able to partner with one another, to scale, to collaborate, to replicate, to expand. And what the decision point is are we going to do it or are we not going to do it? And how do we convince the unconvinced? And how do we hold each other accountable to do everything we can and more? So with that, a thank you to our panel. Please give them a round of applause. And if we can, I would like to ask the first panelist to come up for a photo with this set of panelists. Thank you very much.